Good evening. I'm about to play you exclusive, never-before-heard recordings of notorious jihadi Anjem Choudary that prove that Islamist prisoners have been laughing at the British justice system for years. For me, this is cast-iron proof that convicted jihadis should spend the rest of their natural lives in total isolation, locked in solitary confinement. I'm playing you these clips now because today it was revealed that Choudary is suspected of inspiring Manchester Arena bomb maker Hashim Abidi to allegedly attack prison guards. That's according to reports. Choudary is arguably Britain's most infamous jihadi. He has an Islamist rap sheet as long as a giraffe's neck. He was named as a recruiter for jihadist military training grounds in Britain. He reportedly called the 9/11 terrorists magnificent martyrs. He was a member of Al-Mujahideen, co-founded by Islamist monster Omar Bakri Mohammed. He had links to Lee Rigby's killers. He had links to a Belgian extremist group called Sharia for Belgium. He organised meetings for now-banned group Islam for UK and wanted to organise a vile demonstration in Wootton Bassett, the Wiltshire town, where the bodies of dead British soldiers were returned to from the Middle East. Choudary then pledged allegiance to ISIS and was sentenced to 5.5 years behind bars before eventually being jailed for life with a minimum term of 28 years after being found guilty of directing the Al-Mujahideen terrorist cell. He then found himself in HMP Frankland, which houses Britain's most dangerous and extremist inmates. So who else was there? Well, Hashim Abidi, the bloke who helped build the bomb that detonated in Manchester Arena. Well, today it's reported that security services fear that Choudary helped inspire Abidi to allegedly douse a female officer with scalding hot butter and then stab a couple of other officers as well. Choudary was reportedly in the prison's gym facility at the time of this alleged attack and has now apparently been removed from that prison. Well, tonight, exclusively on GBNews, I can bring you these never-before-heard recordings of Anjem Choudary from 2021, speaking about his previous time in HMP Frankland, making a mockery of these so-called de-radicalization programs and laughing at soft-touch Britain. Here, Choudary talks about how the prison officers have no understanding of radical Islam.
The government obviously introduced these separation centres to supposedly de-radicalise individuals, to stop them being influential within the prison system. But I think one of the glaring fallacies that occurs to anyone who's in there is that there's no understanding or very little understanding amongst the prison officers about anything in relation to Islam, let alone topics like jihad, khilafah, sharia, the kind of things that you would expect someone to have some kind of awareness about.
So in a second recording from 2022 in which Choudary responds to a story about a plan to send dangerous terrorists straight to high-risk wings, Choudary says that the Islamist inmates, they just shun the prison officers.
If anything, practicing Muslims who go to prison want to spend their prison time with fellow Muslims, and they don't want to be looking over their shoulder. And this is the ideal if you like, scenario for them, to be put with other Muslims, like-minded, where they can collectively completely ignore the prison infrastructure and the officers there, whether it be offender managers or psychiatrists or or one-of-the-mill kind of like prison officers. They don't need to have any dealing with them at all.
Yeah, so as we're going to go on to discuss, you can't really put them in general population because they try to spread their jihadi ideology. But then if you put them in a group environment, like at HMP Franklin, well, then they quite enjoy it because they're just all with like-minded individuals, aren't they? Again, reinforcing why solitary confinement is probably the only way. But Choudary describes his relief to be sent to a separation unit when he was originally jailed in Belmarsh.
And for me, I was in the HSU in Belmarsh where that Julian Assange was. When I went to the separation centre, it was like, for me, it was a relief because I'm now only with Muslims. We love each other, we do everything together. We completely ignored anyone who was a prison staff member.
But this is really the most damning clip because one of the big reasons why people are put in prison, the Islamists, is to supposedly de-radicalise them, which I think, and I suspect you think, is a complete myth. But here, Anjem Choudary speaks about how idiotic it is to assume that you can actually de-radicalise a jihadi.
The views that we hold, and I can speak for all of them, are based on very, very clear, defined scripture. And no amount of talking to by a so-called theologian or police officers or judges is going to change those views. And therefore it becomes about a clash of civilizations. Like we always say, it's a clash between Islamic culture and Western culture, or secularism. And the thing is, that clash will continue.
Yeah, so there you go. They don't want to be de-radicalised. These people cannot and will not be de-radicalised. And the problem is huge. Yesterday, it was revealed that Islamist prison gangs are running UK jails, using intimidation and violence to control the facilities and other inmates. I think it's time for Britain to consider building several huge facilities full of solitary confinement cells that are then used to house the ever-increasing jihadi lunatics that we have both inside and outside of our prison system. Let's get thoughts of our panel. We, of course, have GBNews star Alex Armstrong, journalist and broadcaster and columnist Esther Krakow, and journalist Jonathan Liss. Right, Alex, look, so there you go, straight from the horse's mouth. Anjem Choudhury there, Britain's most notorious jihadi, who is, well, at least according to reports anyway, believed to have helped influence Hashim Abedi to carry out his vile attack over the weekend, making a total mockery of the way that we treat jihadis behind bars. Yeah,
I'm frankly not surprised, Patrick, because, in my opinion, there is no way to de-radicalise an extreme Islamist. They are religious to their core, and the fact that these separation centres exist shows we don't understand the problem. You can't chuck in someone like Anjem Choudhury with a bunch of maybe even slightly more moderate Muslims and expect them not to come out even more radicalised. At this point in time, we are sitting on a powder keg. Those people will be released back onto the streets of Britain and will cause... We could be sitting on multiple terrorist attacks in the waiting. If they're doing this inside the most secure prisons in our country, imagine what they'll be able to do when they're let loose free on the streets of Britain. I completely agree with you. There needs to be max security prisons. In my opinion, I'd put them in an island off of Britain, a small little island we've got somewhere that's uninhabited.
Jihadi Island.
Yeah, we'll put them all there in a max prison like the president of El Salvador. No, the president of El Salvador is doing a great job. He's rounding them all the criminals up. He's putting these max security prisons, saying you're not getting out. You're too dangerous.
I mean, look, he's just exposed there, I think, what we already knew, which is, but A, they don't really want to be de-radicalised. B, how on earth are you going to de-radicalise someone whose only objective is to serve, in their view, a higher power anyway, that they see there. They have got, in their view, the purest form of scripture. And then you've also got this idea that grouping them all together with a load of prison officers that have got no interest in trying to understand or no training in understanding jihad whatsoever, what's going to happen? It's a disaster. Surely solitary confinement is the only solution, Esther.
Well, yes. But this is one of many problems that our prisons face. Prisons are like criminal university. You have people in there that have basically committed crimes against society, and that's why they're together. They're exchanging ways of like, oh, I didn't get caught for 10 years. How did you do it? Blah, 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 blah. So there's a question about whether you should have general mixing in prison anyway. But what is the point of prison? It's for, obviously, punishment. It's for rehabilitation, and it's to keep the public safe. There are some people that cannot be rehabilitated, and so the only option is to keep the public, and that includes the prison officers that are charged with their care, away from, it's just to separate them away from literally anyone. So that's the obvious solution. But there's a bigger problem of complete lack of discipline, of impropriety, of lack of decent behaviour in prisons. You have prisoners that smoke weed openly in prison. You go to some prisons, there just stinks of marijuana. You have prisoners that just laze around, just playing video games all day. I'm not saying we should look at El Salvador, which has its own problems, but we should look at places like Japan, for example. They actually make their prisoners work. They have a very strict daily schedule. They wake up at 7, they have an hour lunch break. They actually do physical work. They act like basically soldiers in training. That's not only a form of rehabilitation, but you also decrease the influence of these jihadists that are getting into people's ears. Because if you're lazing about idly, you're more likely to be influenced by evil ideologies.
The facts show that Islamists are just running UK jails, just normal.
It's a big problem in Europe as well.
One
of the largest prisons in Europe,
there's a big
Paris,
problem everywhere with it, isn't there?
Wow.
So what is the common denominator there? Radical Islamism. But anyway, so the jihadi prisoners are running just kind of general prisons, right? And then the solution to that is to lump some of the most notorious ones into somewhere that they'd much rather be, which is places like HMP Franklin. I mean, where would you be, Jonathan, on the idea of unending solitary confinement for the rest of your natural life for people like Anjem Choudhury?
I think that solitary confinement is a policy option that should be reserved for the most dangerous offenders if there is concrete evidence from multiple experts that this prisoner poses a direct risk to his fellow inmates or to prison staff.
So would you release Tommy Robinson from solitary confinement?
Well, I think he asked to be there for his own safety.
That's for his own. I think he's there for his own safety.
I don't think he did ask for it, but I think the first time round, the second time round, he didn't. He was forced into it. He didn't want to be a solitary.
Well, let's it's
a good question.
Alex, I don't.
Hardest criminal.
I don't busy myself with the prison
but it's a
treatment
question.
of
If you're
Tommy
saying it
Robinson.
should, I'm not. I don't. It's a hypothetical question. You know, because we spend a lot more money. I'm sure maybe Robert Jenrick can clarify this when he comes on later. But we spend a lot more money on solitary confinement, given the extra resources needed for it. I don't think it's a long-term solution.
Well,
what's the solution?
I do think there should. I think.
Well, like a prison island. Come on.
Well, no, we should have more.
Yes.
I think in the most extreme cases where someone cannot be rehabilitated and their crimes are so heinous, I do think there should be some public discussion about the death penalty, because at some point it just gets ridiculous.
Look, just to say, these are people. Some of them, in the case of Hashim Abedi, helped to build a bomb that blew up 22 people and injured just over 1,000 others in an arena full of, well, children, women, and obviously there were a fair few adults in there as well, but it was an Ariana Grande concert. So that guy is a sicko, is a monster. I don't think there's any coming back from that. And what you've heard from Anjem Choudhury there is we've plonked him in a place where he's very happy. They're all okay. They're surrounded by other radicals that just sit around and talk about radical Islam all day. They don't have any engagement with any kind of de-radicalisation programme to speak of whatsoever. Well, should they not be punished to the point, someone like Hashim Abedi, who's done the most unspeakable things, his life should be miserable, shouldn't it?
Well, how do you punish him?
Well,
He's already in prison.
Just a black, dark cell until the day he dies.
I don't think that prisoners should be given massive luxuries, for example, if they are the most violent offenders and they pose direct risks to other people around them, for sure. I don't know if permanent solitary confinement for the rest of their lives.
But the thing is, that's not actually a punishment. No, seriously, we have given these people, by our standards, the worst form of punishment, which is to be isolated from the rest of society. You put them in a room all day, guess what they're going to do? Sit there and ruminate over their dangerous ideology 24/7. There should be no such thing as an idle prisoner. If you are there and you've committed a crime against society, every waking moment of your life should be going into being a productive member of society. I don't care whether that's stitching socks, I don't care whether that's crushing bricks, I don't care what it is, but you should not be allowed the luxury of sitting there to ruminate over your evil ideology.
The reality is that Patrick's ideas are similar to mine, but they're never going to happen in this country because of the Human Rights Act and the ECHR and all these sorts of things. We can never do them anyway. Even that we couldn't do. My biggest concern is these people are going to be back on the streets. They will one day. Many of the people that Anjem Choudhury and others have radicalised that we don't know are now severely radical, terrorist level radical, will be back on Britain's soil, back on our streets, out of the prisons. They are going to pose the biggest threat to this country, and they'll radicalise others.
But this is why we have to focus on. This is why we have to focus on.
We have left it far too long. We do need to have an island or a max security prison where, unfortunately, if you are that level, if you've caused terror attacks, you go, and that's it. You're done.
I think that everyone has to be. I think everyone has to be given the opportunity to be rehabilitated and to demonstrate they can be rehabilitated.
Everyone.
Well, I think everyone has to be given. Look, everyone
who built a bomb that killed.
Everyone has to be given a chance at rehabilitation. I'm not saying that everyone will be rehabilitated.
None of them will be rehabilitated.
I don't know that that's true either.
How do you prove rehabilitation? Well, because there was a bloke that did the Fishmonger's Hall attack who said he was rehabilitated, and for all the world seemed there was
no completely fail-safe way to go about this. But I do believe that prison has to be offer people some kind of chance at life. It shouldn't just be punishment. Of course, it has to be punishment, but it can't just be that. And that's why the government is turning to Texas of all places to see how they focus on rehabilitation.
MRT Sheikh warned us about this in 2017. Yeah. He put out a damning statement to the West saying, we don't want them in our country, and this is the Emirates.
Yeah, but this conversation goes further than radical Islamists, though. It does. What about the acts of Rudy Cabanas? I'm sorry, we often complain about how much it costs.
Well, he was a terrorist in my opinion. Prisoners. He just wasn't under the eyes of the law.
Yes, but there are radicals of all shades, and we often complain how much it costs to keep these people that are likely never going to get out, or aren't going to get out for a long long time, how much it keeps to keep them in prison alive on the taxpayer dime.
But can I just say, can I just very quickly say that if your idea, if El Salvador is the model for this, that is demonstrably imprisoning people who have not been convicted of any crime, the Trump administration, that is not rubbish. The vast majority of people do not have. Okay, but the Trump that you guessed El Salvador was the model, and they've literally sent people who have no criminal record to this place, and they're not terrorists. If that's the model, then that is absolutely not the model we should be following.
We don't have a range of views here on this panel because we've got Jihadi Island, we've got hang 'em and flog 'em, and then we've got rehabilitate. So it's a trifecta there for you, isn't it? But anyway,